I took some time to dive back into the works of Junji Ito, and this time I decided to go with Tomie. And this manga was a bit of a mixed bag for me, where the anthology aspect of a story does work to its benefit, but with that there are also a lot of standalone chapters or chapters that are just 2 to 3 parts, and some of them worked really well for me and had me very engaged, while others were a little underwhelming. But what exactly is Tomie about? Well, as Uzumaki was the Curse of the Spiral, I consider this work to be the Curse of Tomie, or maybe even the Curse of Passion. The introductory chapters start right off giving you the origin story of Tomie herself, a beautiful and captivating high school student who constantly invited attention to herself, though it doesn't seem to be for any real reason other than her appearance, her looks. And as both men and women can probably relate, in that we've seen scenario like this many times before in our lives, where somebody just seems to be born with beauty or an allure that doesn't necessitate them having to develop a personality to get attention from others, or most especially, doesn't ever need to develop appreciation for what they have, empathy for others, or even kindness. Now, I'm not saying that Tomie was a bad person when she was human. She just was living a life where she benefited from her beauty, and as a result seemed to become entitled, selfish, and understood that there was a sense of power within whatever it is that she had. One that, after her death, would be used much like a siren on the beach to lure those into her and eat up that affection and devotion as if it were deserved and expected. And whatever curse befalls her within that death also leads the desire for her to become a deadly obsession, going into events of madness and desperation that repeat themselves just as Tomie seems to repeat her own life cycle. People become infatuated with her, she absorbs as much of it as she can, and then it slowly turns into this dark sort of macabre possession that ultimately ends in her death. But of course, this is less of a problem when you're immortal. But let me get back to the story, and minor spoiler alert here. I'll try not to dive into spoilers too much throughout this video, but this part is right in the beginning of the manga, so it's up to you if you consider this spoiler territory or not. I don't really, but just throwing that out there. If you want to read Tomie knowing absolutely nothing, probably hold off on this video. But Tomie, who is desired by boys who want her for themselves and resented by women for stealing the attention away from them, was actually sleeping around with not a student, but her teacher. Obviously something that could not be known, and as another boy overheard their conversation and tried to pull her away, she pushed back, and the altercation sent her falling off a cliff to her near demise. And for some reason that I'm just chalking up to the Curse of Tomie that may have already been in effect, the students there decide they didn't want anybody to get in trouble for this accident that happened, so they agreed to hide the body by finishing the job and then cutting her up into dozens of pieces and then scattering them all over. Which leads me to believe that this sick obsession that turns into this murderous sort of rage already was in effect beforehand, because that's a bit of a leap to take to just think that everybody would agree to that offhand. But there is something about that I really like, which I will come back to in a moment. But anyways, this begins where the rest of the story would go, in that for whatever supernatural reasons that exist and are not explained, the essence of Tomie remains in every single piece of her body, each one regenerating in its own way, and new Tomie are then formed. Much of the manga is standalone stories dealing with a person or people encountering a Tomie, and the scenario tends to go that they are captivated by her beauty and will do anything to be with her, in which she completely relishes in, and she will play into it either by sweet-talking them or just being a straight-up sociopath telling them how beneath her they are, and that they never really had a chance with her anyway. Each person, or should I say each man's obsession with Tomie, manifests in slightly different ways. Either they are painting her a million times, or letting their entire lives fall apart in order to show their affection and loyalty towards her, and ultimately it ends in madness where they are willing to kill for her, which then shifts into a desire to kill her themselves. Like I said, it sort of repeats the cycle of her original human life, where she draws so much attention to herself, and that eventually that lust turns into malice and results in her own destruction. But it doesn't matter because each time she is killed, she will regenerate from whatever pieces of her are left, regenerating in some of the most gruesome and horrific ways, even if it's from within somebody's stomach. Or strands of her hair that are connected to another person's face, digging into them and basically taking over her body, and even being able to take over the bodies of infants and grow into a whole new Tomie from there. But Tomie herself, who could be presented as a tragic character, just really becomes a manipulative succubus type monster. Wherever a version of her ends up, she plays into whatever the situation is in order to gain the most attention and power that she can out of that situation. She plays her part. If she has to be the timid little girl who needs a strong man to rescue her, she'll play into that. If she has to be the respectable daughter type, she'll do that. If she's a stuck-up model who refuses to date a man that seems perfect in every way, she'll do that. And she will even go so far as to manipulate and seduce a child, playing the part of an attentive mother figure. So basically, any female archetype that exists that would give a man comfort or a reason for being, she will take on that role and then manipulate it into the darkest shadow version of that template, essentially using femininity as a weapon. And it works really well. But it seems as though Tomie has no ultimate goal or plan. And I use Tomie as plural since there are many versions of her. It seems like her only objective is to get the most out of the men that she seems to hypnotize within the lifespan that she has until she's ultimately killed once more by the very men that she drives into madness. And yes, I mean that there is something supernatural here that is driving them. Not that a savage, selfish killer instinct couldn't be within all men, but most of them pull a complete 180 as to how they're introduced, which could be a very interesting concept to play with. And it's very much centered around this descent into madness, much the way that Uzumaki was, or even a little bit in Remina. Because I think Junji Ito is very conscious of what madness or what mob mentality will do to people when they lose their sense of self and become obsessive over one thing. That thing here being Tomie. But because Tomie does shift her feminine archetype based on what the story is going for, and because we barely get any insight into her human self, and that she doesn't seem to have any say or care in who her victims are, I can't help but look at Tomie as just a monster. An evil, destructive entity with no empathy or care, or even a slight semblance of a feeling of genuine affection for another. If this took place in modern day, Tomie would be like a Belle Delphine in terms of internet lust and popularity, but instead of just selling her bathwater, it would be probably her toenail clippings, which would sell for thousands, and then when you received it, that toenail would regenerate into a full Tomie that would drive you in and then drive you absolutely insane afterwards. In other words, she's for the streets. But the thing is, I wanted a little bit more from her, in the sense that her origin story is little more than an afterthought as the manga gets going. It doesn't matter in the scheme of the story other than to know that she died and regenerated from the many pieces. But the setup itself to me felt very I Know What You Did Last Summer-ish. A bunch of kids commit a murder and then need to hide it. And if Tomie was more of a vengeful spirit coming after those that killed her, that might have upped the stakes or given the whole event this anxiety-filled tension of admission lingering in the background while trying to figure out if Tomie was really alive again, or what this creature with Tomie's face's objective actually was. But we don't get anything like that here. And that may all be from personal preference, but for me, I think it all comes down to the fact that I like long-form storytelling, and dealing with anthologies, you don't really get that. Even with the idea that there are up to countless numbers of Tomie by the end of the manga, since every piece can regenerate into its own independent girl, we aren't even following the same Tomie from chapter to chapter. So maybe a lack of a solid main character, other than Tomie herself, or an overarching narrative set back my enjoyment a little bit. With Uzumaki, it was also an anthology, but the whole story took place within one town with weird things going on, and it had many crossover characters. But that's not to say that I didn't enjoy Tomie. I absolutely did, and there were some really disturbing and haunting imagery within this manga that I'll be thinking about for some time. I would just have to say that it's my least favorite Junji Ito story that I've read so far. But let me tell you about two specific scenes that I loved. One was everything that happened within the hospital setting early on in the manga. I don't know about you, but I find hospitals to be creepy as hell already, and to just have a floating, regenerating head and person in the basement and a haunting stolen identity story was something that I truly enjoyed. As for the later half of the book, there is a story about a guy who misses his ex-wife, and his friend brings him into this group of men to help him over it, but it's literally just like a cult of simps worshipping Tomie. But this man's love for his wife is so powerful that he is immune to the thrall of Tomie, something that pisses her off so much that she has him kidnapped and tries to force him to love her. And I really like how it shows that her power, whatever it is not infallible. Almost like if you truly love another, you can't love her. And I really wish that the story would have delved into that more. Also, it shows how she can take being the seducer, but can't stand being rejected herself. She's offended by it, which is sort of one of the biggest insights we really get into her as a person. But sadly, this segment is relatively short-lived and not delved into any further beyond that. I don't know, overall, I would put Tomie in the mid-tier of manga that I've read this year. I did enjoy it quite a bit, but I felt like there was a lot of territory that could have been explained deeper that just didn't quite hit the spot for me personally. But anyways, if you guys have read Tomie or you're a big Junji Ito fan, let me know what you think about it down below in the comments because I would definitely love to hear all of your thoughts and opinions. Also, if you did enjoy this review, please like the video because all interaction with the video will help it be seen in the algorithm. If you guys want to follow me elsewhere, all the links will be down below in the description, including my Patreon and merch store if you want to support the channel on a little bit of an extra level. Other than that, guys, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and if you happen to meet a beautiful stranger on the street corner the next afternoon you're out, approach with extreme caution.